Hello, everybody. I'm Jo Hickey Hall. Welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast. And this time I have a wonderful guest with me, Jeremy Harte, author and fellow folklore researcher. I'm particularly excited to speak to you, Jeremy. I have come to see you speak a number of times as well, and it's always been fantastic. If ever you get a chance to go and see Jeremy, please do. But you have just released Fairy Encounters in Medieval England, which a lot of us have been very much looking forward to. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Welcome, and thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I've been able to read your new book. I started following your work with Let's Explore Fairy Traditions, and it's one that I always say to people, you know, it's a classic. Have it on your shelves if you're interested in fairy experiences and, well, fairy folklore as a really great, you know, all-rounder actually, and an introduction to how we view these experiences. So I was very much looking forward to the release of this book because I am curious about how our perception of these encounters have changed over time. And, you know, sometimes when we're delving back into the medieval resources, you know, even when they have been translated, they still seem quite inaccessible unless you are, say, a medievalist or you're kind of really into this. And what I really like about this book is that the way, and you made a decision to write it, you said, I've written as if things happened as they are. And your kind of tone throughout the book, it's really witty, it's very entertaining, and it's extremely accessible for anybody that's interested in these kinds of experiences, whether they happened now or in medieval times. We've got a lot to learn from looking at those sources. So, yeah, I was interested in the fact that you kind of at some point must have made that decision to write things as if they had happened. Can you talk a little bit about that, please? I'd love to know about that.
It's interesting that in a lot of books that I've done, looking back, language has been a running thread. Particularly avoiding the language of alienation. The other more recent book, The Gypsy History, was actually, you know, a reverse decision there to adopt the language of the people I knew, and to impose that on a wider readership as a way, almost the opposite of kind of going, this is other, you know, these are translations from a foreign country. In the case of the fairies, it's kind of reverse decision. It's let's actually stop for a moment and give a sense of being there. I think one of the things that occurred to me, you know, as you know, a part-time medievalist, I live there a lot of the time. And it's only when you're having these kind of conversations in a bar that you realize that it feels very different when you're spending a lot of time dealing with particular individual people and knowing a bit about them, as to the kind of vague general model that people are going to have about history before a certain point. You know, the enormous difficult thing about past periods is adjusting yourself to what seems natural to the people you're amongst. That's why it's almost like an anthropological exercise. And you know, it's a bit like sitting at a table and kind of going, okay, I'm going to eat this stuff. Nobody else around me thinks this is weird. Therefore, it is not weird. I'm going to adjust my settings. And presenting it in, you know, ordinary English was part of that. The other great difficulty is that you were wrestling all the time with the fact, not just that it's coming from you, you know, to you from other languages, but from the fact that there is a language hierarchy split, which doesn't exist in modern Europe. So that people who think in Latin, or, you know, the best grade. I mean, it's interesting when I actually worked as a translator that sometimes I was dealing with people like Ansel. I mean, Ansel was basically using Latin as his first language. If he told a story, he told the story in Latin. A lot of my guys, with whom I have a lot more sympathy, are a bit like me, struggling to, you know, do a reverse translation, going, oh my God, you know, like, what's the word for pack saddle? And they, therefore, in some respects, are closer to the vernacular, and you are trying to get at English, Welsh, bit of Gaelic, the stuff that this is coming from.
That's it. And I think, you're absolutely right. If you're kind of holding something at arm's length, you can't really get underneath it. And I think by getting in there with the stories, it kind of must help you with the translation as well, because you're already kind of sensing things from their point of view. And with Latin, especially, I've found when I've looked up, the odd thing when I've been researching, and there are different meanings for the words, and it can just completely change what they're getting at. And so if you're already there, that's going to help you. You're kind of being almost guided along a little bit, because you're in the crowd and you are seeing it.
I think for a lot of my middle range clerical authors, writing Latin was a bit like cooking in gloves. You did all the right things, but you had this sense of clumsiness just because they couldn't reach for it. And it is quite clear also that they pulled items out, and Fauni is very popular just because it sounds Virgilian and Latinate, and God knows what the hell it means. But it will translate a range of terms, and we know obviously from the place name evidence that lots and lots of different words were being used, and presumably used in some kind of a context, all of which get steamrolled.
Well, and perhaps we can talk a little on that afterwards, because the second half of the book is about place names, and that gives you an insight into, whether. Well, there was an interesting part that you decided to. So most of the names, or at least 43% of them, were referring to Puck, and so. But then you had omitted Hob, which would have been maybe related to a name for someone called Robin, and Grim. So could you just talk a little about that?
The merit of place names is they're statistical.
Yeah.
The disadvantage is they're only statistical, because you can't ask anybody what the hell's going on. So when I was actually involved in the collection exercise, I realized you can cherry pick. You can kind of pull out Hob Lane or Hob Pit and kind of go, well, that's definitely got to be about the Hob. But when you're trying to prove things, which in some ways is what you're driving at, the beauty is that there I was actually hearing people's voices. And of course, the problem is I was getting the story that went with them, whereas, the other half of the book is the other way around. I've got stories, but I'm struggling all the time. As the people were at the time, I think there's a genuine difficulty quite often on the part of the people who are transmitting this to kind of go, well, I have no idea what's going on, but this is, how I can best understand it. I mean, there's lots of issues about how much distance was there between a lot of these people. The most interesting stories are miracles, and miracles are normally written by monks because they're the custodians of the shrine. So, unlike the secular clergy, they've actually grown up in an isolated clerical environment all their lives. So they really don't know what's going on. And then they're confronted. What amused me were the cases like Reinbergis, who is obviously one hell of a tough cookie. You see her turning up, making her way into St. Athel's shrine at Ely, kind of announcing, I am here to be cured. I'm going to lie down and go to sleep next to the altar. Wake me up when I'm better.
Yes.
And it's certainly. And it's, now, I would like to tell you about the background to my miraculous experience. Do you by any chance have parchment and paper ready?
Thank goodness he did.
The point is that she's elite. She's from a knightly family. And she can probably basically pull rank on most of the monks when she's in full flow. Whereas the other end, an awful lot of these people, one of the distinguishing features, these are people on a hell of a long way down. I mean, the fisherman who gets blinded by a demonic wind is landed by his mates. He's from the Isle of Wight. They know the nearest place to go is St. Swithin's at Winchester. They land him at Southampton and can't go, Winchester, it's north. See if you can get there. he teams up, and, this is ridiculous. This is almost like folktale. He teams up with two women. So like he doesn't know where he's going, but they can ask people and see, but he'll help them along. The three of them hobble, halfway through Hampshire, arrive at the shrine where there is probably some kind of pious mechanism for looking after people. Otherwise everybody would have starved, and makes his way to his cure. But, he is about as far down in terms of opportunity as you can get.
Yes. Yeah.
And that kind of situation, when we're asking questions like, why does the experiential narrative from these people sound different, that's, occasionally similar to the sort of stuff you're collecting? These people whose lives are so much closer to the edge.
Well, this is it. I mean, there's a couple of things there. I mean, shall we head into the tales themselves at this point? Because I mean, that the young woman that you're referring to there in that first story, could you tell us the story of the various layers of her experiences there? Because it began
when we meet with her. The family has had a bit of a knock. They've lost the knightly father. Her mum has actually remarried a burgess from Wallingford. So I mean, Wallingford is it's got a large castle next to it. It's a well established town on the Thames Valley. Nevertheless, there's kind of a feeling that the good days are over, and then it's at that point which she is visited by an imposing lady who inflicts illness on her. Essentially, all of these stories begin with the supernatural inflicting illness, even if the same supernatural takes it away again and says, "You must go and be healed at Ely." And between the lines, I'm reading her mum says, like, "Yeah, we cannot afford Ely. We've got no idea what the household budget is like now that your father's dead." And Reinbarger says, "I have received this supernatural message." And the supernatural women, all women, keep on coming to her. And then, at first, the imposing lady strikes her and says, "You must." Then you've reached a point at which she comes back and says, "I have been worried about you." And there's this interesting moment where she kind of goes, "And I saved you from drinking the water that your mother put out for you." And that's like, okay. I mean, there's something that hints at other stories we've got with the theme of not consuming or drinking in the other world.
Yeah.
And then, like, the imposing lady suddenly splits dreamlike into two characters. So there's a short, angry lady who's demanding that something be done about her and pushes an iron nail into her head. And then the good lady, as she now is, comes back again, performs psychic surgery, takes the nail out again, heals her, but says, "You must go to Ely and give thanks." Now, the giving thanks bit is all kind of standard miracle narrative. Something happens to you. Originally, most miracles happened at the shrine. And then eventually, people who, have had an accident and literally can't move, prayers are said. And then the corollary to that is, well, instead of being healed at the shrine, you have to go and give thanks afterwards. So that's like standard teaching. But the version here is that although he's going to the shrine of a female saint, and although there is this holy sisterhood of Athelthruth and her sisters kind of scattered throughout East Anglia, nobody ever actually identifies themselves as being saintly. And of course, they behave in a deeply unsaintly fashion, as we would put it. So it's, a folk narrative is being grafted onto the story that is being told at second or third hand around the abbey.
Yeah. A lot of the stories do involve people being struck on the head and, brains being taken out or brains being put back in. And it's an interesting way to look at how they may have been, speaking about people after they've had experiences and how kind of lost they were for a while, and then suddenly they are found again. And throughout the stories you've got people talking about seeing fauns and kelpies. There are women coming up from kind of marshes and streams and attacking people. There's a lot of attacking going on in these. You've got little red men, you've got shape-shifting seducers, black dogs, and as you mentioned before, a lot of these kinds of beings, these otherworldly beings, are still appearing now because I'm speaking to people who are having these experiences. The difference is that it's very unusual for anybody to be attacked. Sometimes there's a challenge and it's about kind of overcoming fears, and people have been really shaken to the core with some of these experiences, but I haven't spoken to anyone who has actually been attacked. Yeah, what do you think about that? What's going on in some of these stories? And of course, I know that we can't definitively say, but I just wonder if you had a sense, by reading some of these.
Even allowing for like closing time outside your local pub. We live in a society where people spend less time beating the shit out of each other. There's two sides to it, the violence and the madness.
Right.
I think certainly there's a lot more social expectation of violence, apart from anything else, as a kind of class-based encounter. It was assumed that servants would get knocked about and so on. Obviously, the gender version. I mean, there's Reginald of Durham's got one miracle where a woman keeps on getting knocked down by a spirit while she's doing the housework, and bits of me are kind of going, quite sure that was a spirit, or you possibly falling over and knocking your head on the fender, madam. You interpret. I mean, one of the things I did train myself out of doing was trying to work out what the hell was ever going on, precisely because if lots of people have done it. I mean, if you take narratives like The Green Children of Woolpit, which is like one of those classic stories, there's a whole industry in kind of pouncing on this narrative and going, well, really what was going on was X, 2 kids suffering from sclerosis, a couple of Flemings who landed in East Anglia and didn't speak English and so on. And you're going, we can get away with that with one text. But sit down and work on the miracles of Thomas of Canterbury. There's like 2 collections of about 300 miracles each. And by the time you've reached page 10, you were going to have given up entirely on going, well, what was really wrong with them was X. You have to go with the flow of your narrative if you're to talk about the history at all.
Yes. A lot of those coming into contact with those beings was when they were out sort of on the road somewhere as well, which of course in those times was dangerous to be traveling. And that a lot of people, even people with much less access to resources, would have been riding on a horse purely because it was just so dangerous to be on foot. There's a couple of instances where people do, for whatever reason, have to go on foot or decide to go part way on foot and then get attacked. So there's all of that too. But the Woolpit, this is a really interesting case because I think what is very compelling for me is to read William of Newburgh's. He's saying, look, I can't quite get my head around this, but I can't not tell you about it because I've had so many kind of weighty testimonies from reliable witnesses. What I think he says, weighted testimony of reliable witnesses. So, this is something that he felt he had to write down, and a lot of the witnesses were still around when he was writing this. So, what do you make of that story?
I think William, he's more intelligent for his job. He's sitting, in the Augustinians. It's a nice job. It's not near any intellectual heartlands. I mean, he's in the Diocese of York, but not near York. Somebody says to him, well, what we really do is having a history because, you're interested in this stuff. And what they haven't realised that they're tackling somebody who has actually got a discriminating mind based on, the 2 categories. You see, because we tend to prioritise history because, it's still going. We don't prioritise theology quite so much. We don't prioritise law in the same way. But for the 12th century, those were the 2, disciplines which made you think and weigh evidence. But they actually come up against somebody who is used to doing that, and not just about the supernatural narratives, although that kind of sticks out a bit more. All through, he's actually going, well, is this actually consistent with how the world is? but is it consistent with how the evidence is? And if the evidence is not how I think the world is, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to shrug my shoulders and hand it over to you. Whereas a lot of his contemporaries just kind of go, yada yada, a dragon in Sudbury, whatever.
Yeah.
A reputable knight once told me, and you know, they're just happy to write another story.
Yes. Yeah, and of course we've got the other testimony from Ralph de Coggeshall as well. So you know, it's really unusual to get.
Yeah, Ralph is a lot more casual about it.
Yeah, he's local though, isn't he?
Local as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great story. I think about William, and what makes me laugh is, you know, we talk about people now with their boggle thresholds, and the way, you know, you look at an event or you hear a story and you just can't quite get your head around it, and it just feels like, you know, that the children of Woolpit really came up against William's boggle threshold there. But the other interesting aspect to that story, I feel, is, well, there are many, and for people that don't know the story, would you like to just give a quick overview of the story?
Well, my first welcome duty is to recommend John Clarke's book.
Yes.
So
you've published with University of Exeter Press, and there's 3 books. There's yourself and Simon's book that's just been released as well, which I really want to get my hands on those. And the Children of Woolpit is a fantastic exploration of the entire event, and he's really looked through all of the Latin, you know, sources again. And I'm very much looking forward to reading that. So yes, please, if you could.
Yeah, it's presented to us very close to the original testimony. In the summertime, in the harvest time, we're combining the 2 accounts here, because what happened clearly is that from Essex, from Suffolk, letters were circulated which were pretty close to testimony as taken down. 2 children are found at the edge of a pit or a ditch, probably a pit on the outskirts of the village, by harvesters. And the children are green, and this green is seriously unusual. As John points out, it's the term used is prasinum, which is basically leek green. So they're not just feeling a little bit pale that afternoon. Can't speak English or anything else that's spoken in Suffolk villages. Are taken to the house of the nearby knight. And Sir Richard, you know, interrogates and gets no sense out of them. They won't eat. They don't recognise, again, you know, the anthropological element. They don't recognise anything people eat in Suffolk as food. Until some beans are brought in. They throw themselves on the beans, split down the stems, and then burst into tears again because they don't find anything. And somebody kind of gently takes out the pods. These are like raw beans, the only beans there are then. And opens them up and shows them this is where the beans are. They gorge on the beans and eat nothing else, and survive on them until the boy dies. He was sickly from the beginning, but the girl starts eating local food, takes on the local colour, and ends up, you know, as like the ex-green girl. Goes and marries a guy from King's Lynn and just melts, you know. So clearly, I mean, the you know, if only we could get the genealogical stuff far back enough. Yes, I
know.
Yes,
this is it.
She's just there. She melts into the background.
Exactly.
Again, this is one of those the translation exercise that William's version, no, Ralph's version. William adapts Ralph's text for a bit of this, but Ralph's version is but very petulant and wanton.
Yes.
In the standard translation, which I think even Francis Young uses in his Suffolk Fairy Law book.
Yeah.
And I'm like kind of going, that's not like stuff that you're going to find online when somebody's describing their next door neighbour, are they?
I agree.
And also, you know, there's a how do you work with something like that? I mean, I think, you know, because I'm kind of going, actually, if I was dealing with a kid who had had a stressful experience as a child and had like put it behind her and was now a teenager, early 20s, that's exactly the behaviour I would expect.
Not only that, but the Latin can also mean playful and free.
Yes.
And so to me, if you're talking about, you know, other, and if they were from another world and or wherever they were from, it is very unusual that they couldn't eat, say bread. I'm sure they would have been given all of the sorts of things, bread, eggs, whatever, to try and, to not be able to recognize any of that is very strange. So, very otherworldly. But if you've got somebody coming from somewhere else that is so terribly different, and they come into our society with its ridiculous, hierarchies, particularly then when you think about, the class structures and society, then if you are, completely free of that kind of that mindset, then, and we're behaving in a way as if all of that were nonsense, say, for instance, then you would be regarded as free and playful. So I think that's quite interesting.
I mean, the interesting thing there is that it's the same threat, though less vividly firsthand, that you get from Gerald of Wales when he's describing Simon the Demon Steward. Because again, of course, Gerald is getting this from the Stackpoles that Simon worked for. And they're kind of going, yeah, don't know where he came from. Redheaded like rings bells immediately. This is how the storytelling is supposed to work.
Right.
But, we took him on because he seemed to, know the business. And it was like, it was, very, very reliable, but he was like terribly casual with the servants. He didn't seem to have any distance from them. You're like, yep, guy from another world.
Yeah.
And like, didn't really bother about the money. It's like, yep, guy who comes from a place where you can turn stuff into gold if you like. It's not really terribly bothered about hoarding things.
I know it is a fascinating, example, and a very rare one because of all these reasons, all of the evidence and these little, these little aspects of the case that are so intriguing, and the fact that we've got several witnesses. And I think about the opening of the beans as well, and the fact that they went for the stalks.
Yes.
Well, that's where plants get their sustenance, is through the stalk, not from the bean. So as human beings, we go for what's produced.
Yeah.
But in nature, we go, the sustenance comes from the stalk, doesn't it? Yeah. So I think about, them, were they an aspect of nature? It just, for me, it kind of ties them into being an aspect of nature, but we will never know. It is a great case. Some of the other stories that you share, could you talk a little about Richard of Sunderland?
Oh, Richard, yes. This is not, because the Green Children have been in the repertoire, as it were, since the 19th century. The miracles that Richard of Sunderland, a very minor manuscript that somebody kind of, fell across and went, and just translated for the benefit of local historians. So the narrative that emerges there, it's from the Northumberland coast. You can see Farne Island from where it happens.
Oh, wow.
So you can spot it on the map, basically, because we know where he lives, and we know that he went down to cut some reeds. Well, there's only one road that takes you down to a marsh. Yeah. You can go there if you like. There he is, working, presumably early in the morning. Early in the morning is another of these dodgy times. And people miss that now, because everybody now kind of has midnight, stamped on their brain, midnight and full moon. Because everybody's got a watch, so they know when midnight is. Nobody in the Middle Ages knows when midnight is, apart from a few professional astronomers, because you can't tell by looking at the sky, except by technical. So whereas midday, everybody recognises, because you look up at the sky and kind of go, okay, time for a break or whatever. And of course, that first light in the morning when people are out and about, because this is Northumberland, so you have to wake up early in the darkness for most of the year.
Yeah.
He's out in that. And so when he first sees them, he probably can't actually see there's anything unusual about him. There's just three guys riding towards him. And again, class thing, he stops, bows politely. He's obviously quite young from the force of the story. And the three riders turn out to be green. And on green horses. The green horses thing, we've had an interesting comment. Melwas in Welsh poetry, one of the otherworldly heroes, is also riding a green horse. So is, of course, the Green Knight in Gawain and the Green Knight.
Yeah.
It gets around. I think it's not just green horse. It's riding a horse of the same colour as yourself.
I see. Like
Yeah,
white, like a white
yeah,
horse with a white.
like
Yeah.
right, yeah. And you actually have red men on red horses in
Mm.
Destruction of the Durga's Hostel.
Yeah, that makes
So
sense.
Dan
Yeah,
the Company
yeah.
kind of thinks it's a bit odd. They address him politely. And then one of them just picks him up. And obviously there's a sense. Again, this is where these things require close reading. Like picks him up and puts him on it. Like he obviously reaches down supernaturally and just picks him up like a weight.
Mm.
And off they take him. And then it says, and then a valley opens up. And I'm kind of going, okay, that's the point at which I would expect them to go into a hill. But Marie de France in the Lay of Yonok, I think, has a very similar version that you're traveling to the other world through valleys.
Wow.
And of course, back to my place names again. I went back looking at valleys with the, in the alert eye. And then to another world. So they're obviously taking him to wherever it is they come from.
Mm-hmm.
It has a king, which is virtually the only reference to this in the medieval material, the medieval experiential stuff. The people live in a state of endless holiday. They're very big on inviting him to join them, and they give him a horn full of green liquid, green horn, which he, and this is a great bit, having heard stories of that type before, knows to refuse. So they're like, kind of, come join us, be one of us. And he's like, no. And, at this point in the relationship, they turn quite nasty and like, why should you turn down the opportunity of endless pleasure? And then, he's like, no. And they chuck him out, having inflicted him with dumbness, which dumbness and madness are basically interchangeable in this repertoire.
Mm-hmm.
You're removed from sociability. And then at that point, obviously at that point, and of course the question is, how the hell does anybody know what happened to him, given that he's done? He is brought back by St. Bartholomew of Farn, who knew a thing or two about demons. And it's then that we get the story from him.
Yes.
But the whole thing, it just sticks out because that's a classic, what in my earlier book I would have said was definitely much of a fairy tradition. Although the guy is there and he's telling the story, he's couching it in the form of a folk narrative, which obviously comes from a whole tradition of storytelling, but which just sticks out. Like there must have been antecedent stories. We don't know of any of them. We only have fleeting bits. And, compared to the sort of archives that you work from in the 19th century, where you go into, the research room at Dublin and somebody kind of wearily points you to 250 volumes of book, collectania on Irish folklore and kind of goes, which fairy legend would you like? From the whole of Europe, we've got these very scattered bits. We have one Stolen Cup story and William, we've got one story of, normally, interestingly, in the later versions, a friend amongst the fairies cautions you not to drink from the horn, and you're about to do it innocently. And I don't know whether that just got left out or whether, the other bit, it hadn't entered it yet. You've got stories in Thomas de Contemporary, so from like Belgian border, which contain abduction folk tales in which a girl is retrieved from the other world by a man who thinks she's dead, carries her off, takes her back to the parents, kind of going, I'm terribly sorry about your daughter. And then, she revives and marries him, which reappears very much as an Irish tale type. But then we've got one like bizarre early Irish experiential story sticking out. Probably 10th century, in which a man is out shooting birds and a girl falls out of the sky. And he takes her away thinking again, he's got the dead girl, but she revives again and says, thank heavens you rescued me, otherwise I would never have been in this world. And that, because one of the tussles, it amuses me. If you want to write a book on fairies, it depends which audience you're right. You want to write an academic book on fairies. Diane Perkins does it, I think, about chapter 2 or 3. She has a lot of fun going, fairies are not Celtic. And you're like kind of going, yeah, okay, right. I know where you're coming from. There's the Scandinavian material, there's the Northern European. But when people say Celtic, in this context, basically what they mean is Irish plus Scots Gaelic. And yes, our problem with the narratives, which lie alongside experience, is that the Irish have the earliest literature of it, massively, for anybody else. And it contains the themes that will be there in 19th, 20th century folklore. which Eddie Lennon is still going out and still collecting.
Very true.
But what relationship this bears to experience is very tricky, because I would love, to be able to just kind of snap my fingers and kind of go, well, there were these things that happened to people, and these are things that happened, and then there are the stories. But, I had to draw on material like Richard of Sunderland simply because that contained so much that made sense of other stories, the cup, the being carried off, the riders.
Yeah.
I'm
glad you did.
At the same time, you're thinking these things are happening in a world where the stories are known. And of course, what gives us the advantage of having a data set at all is that people who are healed are telling these stories.
Yeah.
And what happens to people who weren't healed? Is anybody?
Exactly. Yeah.
England may have been full of people with mental difficulties, wandering around and going, it was all because I was touched by the strange lady, and everybody in the village is going, yeah, we know it happens to anybody who sleeps out at midsummer. I'm sorry, you're not going to get any better.
Yeah.
England may have been full of people who actually went around. We do have the one instance, the Clarks of Suffolk, where, she's touched by the fairies again and her head twists around. Twisting
yes.
head around is a big thing.
Yeah, it was a mother and daughter, wasn't it?
Mother and daughter, Agnes and Marion. Yeah. Agnes is the one who apparently has been like, her and the fairies are like that, and then suddenly something goes horribly wrong, and they kind of go, I'm not too happy with that, squelch, and twist her head round backwards, and she's still quite young, she isn't married. She, an old man comes in, presumably has to turn around to say, hello, old man. And, in the way of a lot of people in healing stories, he's an old man who comes from nowhere, gives advice on what to do, and then says, you are going to get better and you are going to have a wonderful daughter who is going to be, the chosen one and the favourite of the saints and the fairies, who obviously, in this Suffolk village are basically interchangeable people.
Let's talk about that, because I wanted to ask you, you have these people, you have the folk that live in the communities and the way that they talk about fairies, and then you have what the church is dictating. And I think you mentioned that the church disliked the kind of uncertainty that fairies brought with them. And I thought that, that's really bang on. And, because otherworldly beings, they can curse, but they can also bless.
Yes.
As I would see it today too. This is the way of the world. It isn't black and white. You were talking about the way that if the church are able to convince communities that it really is black and white, or authorities are able to convince communities that it is black and white, we can see the same thing happening today, then it's much easier for them to achieve a kind of border control between this world and the other realms. Could you talk about kind of when that framing might have started to take place with the church and fairies?
There's another book plug here, Richard Firth Green, who's because I was fascinated by it. He covers so much ground, in fact, that he liberated me to write on experiences, because I kind of felt that he dealt with so much of the literary side.
Yes.
But
Holy Friars, Holy Friars.
Elf Queens and Holy Friars.
Elf Queens and Holy Friars, that's
let
it.
The good people have a look. Yep.
Fabulous. Yeah.
So it's a very intelligent book, inside which, as I kind of reached the final pages, I thought there's a less intelligent book lurking in here, because it is about, what we're talking about here, the imposition of a binary reality and the demonization of fairy. And at the same time, I can see somebody walking away from it and kind of going, well, everybody used to have a lovely time hanging out with the fairies. And then the nasty monks and friars turned up and started spoiling everything. And you're like, again, it's playing to a perception for people who, as it were, don't live there. That there was the Middle Ages, and there were people, and there were the church, and the church mucked things up for people. Like kind of going, little sense of how integrated the church and the people are. Not only in the sense that the whole social spectrum, from power to poverty, is as represented in the church as it is in the laity. Your hermit kind of living in a hut by the bridge and surviving, off the charitable donations of people going by. It's not quite in the same league as, your bishop with an office of state and advising the king.
Yeah.
And the church itself, precisely because it had its own internal power dynamics, was lousy as acting as an individual. I also do local history. There's a hilarious account of what happens when the vicar of one of my local churches is told that he really ought to cough up and support the Battle of Bannockburn. It hasn't been fought yet. I think he might have been a bit disappointed on the financial returns. But Edward II actually is imposing taxation. All the Edwards impose taxation on the churches in order to pay for the expansionist scenes of the state. And I was both amused because the guy did what anybody did. He just kind of dug his heels in and said, well, unfortunately, I can't find the grain here because I haven't collected my tithes yet. Okay. But also the fact that the church, qua church, had no official position on this whatsoever. It was so integrated with society that when you did things in the Middle Ages, you simply assumed that the clergy and the laity would come along. So the church doesn't act as an external agency in the way that, say, a governing elite does. And it is deeply involved with everybody at all levels because the actual support for it is coming directly out of people's hands. What people want out of their local priest is a guy who is going to be holier than everybody else. Yeah. And they are deeply happy to do things that look from the outside extremely alienating. People pay to put up rood screens so that they can't see him perform the miracle of the Mass. It's like, and the laity are doing this. He's not kind of going, well, I want to be a special person. I want to be screened off from you. They're raising the funds because they want him to be special. But of course, within the church, you've got essentially the cadre of mostly the higher-ranking monastic orders against the parish clergy. And you realise after a while, they just looked on the parish clergy as being kind of, well, they've got tonsure, but, let's face it, often got wives until about 1200, 1300 in the north of England. They hang around, they go out farming. It's the attempt to actually produce a professional parish clergy doesn't get going until almost like at the end of my period.
Yeah.
So the people who are having the ideas, the people who are pressing for, a clearer sense of what the other world is, are part of an intellectual movement, which is happening at the same time as Aquinas, and which is happening with the attempts to produce a disciplined narrative. And this goes in all sorts of weird directions, because one of the reasons why we have the details of demon lovers that we do in the late Middle Ages is not coming from folklore. It's coming from theologians. They're kind of going, hey, they're spirits. Yeah, they're spirits, and he raped me. He was a spirit. Madam, did you by any chance, have any periods? Yeah, here is my baby. Look, he's got pointed ears. Madam, I would like to point out that spirits cannot actually have intercourse with people because they're spirits. And then you get this weird incubus succubus stuff, which is just worked up by clergy because they're having to try and make sense of what the folk are telling them. And they can't do it because it's crossing boundaries that they already have imposed. But then at the same time, the harshness, you may think he's quite a nice guy, but actually I am warning you, he's a demon. Do break off your relationships with that nice young man who keeps appearing in your bedchamber. Is not purely clerical, because that's part of an all-round hardening of the late medieval mind. Relationships where there is, you get occasional embarrassing people like the guy who says, yeah. It's like a bit of a mixed neighbourhood where I am. There's a couple of Saracens. They're all right. Apparently they go off on Friday. A couple of Jews, they go off on Saturday. We all get on all right. It's like, what do you understand about Christendom, you idiot? But that move is not necessarily clerically led. I mean, the expulsion of the Jews from England, because the Jews stand in a lot of ways for the other world. This is what Agnes and Marion are quite clearly convinced that the secret treasure that the fairies have revealed to them is going to be found in the Jews' house in Bury St Evans.
Right.
But the Jews were expelled by popular insistence, pushing both the elite, in the sense of the king, and the clergy to change tack on it. So there are all kinds of aspects. So, and one of the things I came away from reading Richard First Green was, well, yeah, but we're talking about violence here. We're talking about fear. Quite a lot of people would prefer to have demonized fairies that they could actually, exorcise, as opposed to non-demonized tricksy fairies who they had to relate to.
Right. Yeah. That is true. Yeah, that is a good point. And Simon Young has written a good book on the figure of the wandering Jew as well. So I was interested in kind of how that crosses over with otherworldliness and these figures that may sort of disappear apparently for centuries and then kind of reappear as these wise men, as you mentioned before, that kind of might step in and offer solutions or kind of enchantments, wisdom.
The travelling wise man carries on in 17th, 18th century spa narratives. Matthew Chancellor received these revelations about how Glastonbury Holy Well was going to be curative, from travelling wise men.
Yeah, it is.
And of course, the other thing that you allow for is that unlike the later periods, there actually were elderly, erudite men on the road, because who else are the Franciscans? It was taken for granted that there would be this resource. So our kind of assumption that all the clever people have gone to university and have now got a nice house somewhere at the better end of the village doesn't transfer.
Yeah.
A lot of clever people in the Middle Ages, are actually begging at the doors of a lot of well-off but illiterate people.
Yeah, true. I was interested to learn about some of the kind of sermons also from sort of researching these sorts of areas that were used to have kind of collections of sermons that would then be passed around to other places saying, oh, this one's quite good, this one's quite popular. So you would have these books where they could flick through and pick out, as a resource to read to the congregation. And some of them were very threatening to the congregation about what it is that they were believing in. And I know you mentioned the kind of, your book looks at sort of between the 12th and 15th century, and you do mention their aggressive doctrines, but I was still struck by the way that you've got kind of Council of Arles in the mid 5th century. Then you've got Council of Tours in the mid 7th century, I think, or the following century, mid 6th century. And then you've got the Christian decrees being set down too. So every kind of 150 years or so, or at least of the evidence that we have, you've got the church saying to the bishops, if there are people in your community seen venerating fountains, wells, and stones, it's you that's going to be held responsible. And then, in the end, in the Christian decree, they say to cast down the stones so that the community can't go and do what they're still continuing to do, despite all of these centuries worth of decrees being set down. So I would love someday for even more resources to be found to tell us a bit more about, the way that people lived and the beliefs that they had. And I do hope that at some point more manuscripts come to light to tell us about that in some kind of way. But that was very present with me as I was reading through your book, is that, these beliefs and these encounters and connections with the other world were continuing despite all of that, and people making sense of it in their own way. I mean, obviously these have been written down usually by holy men, because they've gone into orders and they are there on the scene to be able to be perhaps one of the only few sort of literate people to be able to write down this evidence for us. So I know that you're always seeing it through that lens, but nevertheless, it's a really interesting collection Do you find now that you're having written that and reading other folklore from other centuries, do you find that you kind of relating to it in a different way, having gone through those encounters from medieval resources?
I think there's an interesting methodological point here between folklorists and historians. The convergence is not yet perfect. But I realised this because I was reading Carl Watkins, who's also a great guy, on the medieval supernatural. But Carl is a documents man. He's properly trained. So as far as he's concerned, the text in front of him is the text in front of him, and he reads it essentially through the eyes of the guy who wrote it down. So not my concern about exhuming the vernacular original. But also because of that, there's very much a sense that you don't fill in the gaps from other narratives. Whereas if you're working in folklore, your home ground is really these. I mean, England is anomalous in the sense that we have to actually go out and collect our stuff from scattered publications. Globally, a folklore collection usually consists of shelf after shelf or filing cabinet after filing cabinet of material which has been directly collected from people. And therefore, you just take it in the mass. You start off with 100 versions of the Changeling, and if version number 32 happens to miss the detail of the brewing in eggshells, you just can't go, oh well, it's deficient. And when you find a bit of a story, you go, aha, yes, I know what they're saying here, except that they've understood it wrong. Now, instinctively, I prep the medieval material now with my kind of aha filter on, going, yes. There's a little element here which is pointing me towards something, and I think we have got Malekin.
That's a great story.
Let's bring Malekin in.
Yeah, let's bring Malekin in.
Who doesn't like a white-clad chatty toddler with the language skills of a 1-year-old? She was obviously a charmer. The fact that she was invisible was neither here nor there. She bobs up in the house of the Daglingworths, isn't it? And at first, they respond with that mild state of alarm that you do when you hear voices chatting to you from the corner and there's nobody there. But she talks to everybody. In local vernacular, they do actually say. So obviously, Ralph, and it's like Ralph probably doesn't quite have a sense of the English language. There's like Latin and there's what they talk in Suffolk, because she also talks Latin to the village priest with the language skills of a one.
Well, that's right. Yeah, the chaplain in their house. Yeah.
And tells people things about themselves.
Yes.
So again, that's one of my kind of aha. That's interesting because that's
secrets
elsewhere, secrets. But also bizarrely, simultaneously, presents herself as a spirit, is only seen once by the servant girl as a little white figure, says that she has a special cap which she puts on when she wants to make herself invisible, as if she isn't, her native state is physical or at any rate visible.
Right.
Says that she lives with her mother and brother, who are going to beat hell out of her if they find out that she's been out fraternizing with the humans. Okay, so mother and brother are not humans. And then also simultaneously says that she was stolen during harvest time. And of course, the harvest time, it's a classic aha moment for a folklorist. We're going, yep, there is a whole 19th century corpus of babies being taken at harvest.
Yeah, and the Woolpit happened at harvest too.
Harvest as well, yeah.
Again, a kind of another inversion.
Yeah, this is an inversion thing. One of the things that fascinated me about that, because it's interesting, Simon Young and I corresponded about this, and we both hit on the same literary reference, which is a bit in Tess of the D'Urbervilles, where Tess has got the illegitimate baby but has to go out and work and puts the baby down at the end of the road, goes and suckles the baby goes back to sleep again, carries on working. Well, like kind of going, yeah, okay, obviously the whole point about the medieval economy at harvest is that everybody goes out and works in the field, every hour God sends, because you're terrified the rain's going to come down and you're going to lose the crop.
Yeah.
So there are going to be a lot of babies, under minimal standards of care. And I'm kind of going, but yeah, look, hang on, if I, could I feel that I wish to put a baby down even now in the middle of a field, I would have other concerns apart from fairies. And this is in the 12th century when there are still English wolves.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the bizarre things, we're talking about danger, is the actual animal danger in the countryside. There are wolves, there are wild dogs, even, livestock. Nobody actually flags any of that. Like their first concern, you get this, the first concern of 5-year-olds lost in the fields. It's not that something animate is going to attack them. It's that they are going to be at risk from the supernatural.
Yeah. Could they have hung a crib from a tree? Would they do something like that? That's where I'm going in my mind. But
that's a good mother.
As a mother.
Yes. It's open field, so there are no trees. Again, this is what I mean, the whole living there thing. You automatically impose an English hedged landscape.
Yes, this is it. And of course,
on rolling plains.
The clue is in the name of Woolpit, because of course it's named after wolf pits, which is there would have been a wolf pit.
Yeah, which William translates, because William is telling the story actually for posterity much more than Ralph is. Ralph is just kind of going, it's an interesting story. Some of the people in Montfort might like to know about it. William bothers to explain to you there is this county called Suffolk, it's in eastern England and so on.
Yeah. So 2 different places, but just saying, obviously, because we're talking about the same time period in England when there might have been, there would have been wolf pits, clearly, because there was one in Woolpit. It is. It's very, that is a very good point. So you've got these conflicting ideas from Malekin of where they've hailed from.
And I either, in a sense, we go back to it being absolutely accurate. This is what she said. It's not as if they didn't have the opportunity to sit down and take notes. If he's talking in Latin to the priest, you'd be virtually taking dictation.
Yeah.
Or the alternative is that, their attempt to put the story together is heading in 2 different directions. In the one case, she is a classic changeling, and in the other, she is a fairy child. Oh, yes, and food which was left out lying around disappeared mysteriously. Which again, you'll remember the material in Lady Wilde's Irish Collectania, where abducted women, which is, I think, a separate branch of narrative from the changelings, but it is, overlaps with it, of course, in lots of motifs, only survive because, again, they can't eat the food of the otherworld, so they have to come back to the house at night and basically eat the scraps of anything that's left lying around.
Yeah.
And there's a woman that says, 7 years I have had nothing but the cold potatoes left on the dresser.
Oh. Well, the other thing to note, I guess, is that Malekin does sound like a trickster.
Yes.
And so they're sending...
Was she an entirely reliable source?
Yeah.
Yes.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if that chaplain's, if he did take anything down, if that manuscript could be sitting in somebody's dusty old collection somewhere? You just never know.
Yeah.
And interestingly, on kind of the Woolpit and the genealogy, a man contacted me recently, and as a child, he had seen a green hand come around the door of his bedroom, and it had, frightened him. And he told his parents, and his parents were very sweet with him about it. But he swears that he did see this green hand reaching around. On asking him about his ancestry, his family hailed from around that area.
Right.
So I'm going to look a bit more closely at this, but obviously, again, we'll never know, because we never know if this green girl went on to have children when she married the man from Lynn, later King's Lynn. But you do wonder whether there are, and the family would have been told to keep that quiet anyway, because they wouldn't have wanted their lineage to have been out in the open, because again, othering. It is.
And the interesting thing is that when we start doing mass DNA tests in East Anglia, shows how open a place it was to strangers.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You suspect in a port town they'd almost have reached a point where kind of going, came from a mysterious land called St Martin's Land, underneath the pit somewhere in the middle of the county. Yes, meet my friend here, he's a Fleming. I know another bloke here, he's Russ here.
That's right.
That chap over there, you see him in the corner. He's actually from the other side of the Atlantic. They brought him back with him after a failed voyage to Greenland.
Yeah, very much so. It was definitely a place where they were very used to strangers coming in, for sure. Yeah, very good. The fact that you've got stories where people are tending to arrive in threes, that's something that comes up a lot, or they've got to chant something, three comes into it all the time, whether they've got to say something three times or do something three times. Did you manage to tie that to anything in kind of where that may have come from in medieval folklore or medieval beliefs? I mean, three is a magic number, of course, but
well, I mean, dangerously, it takes you back to the Romano-Celtic deity carvings.
Right. Yes.
There are various things going on there. Okay, so let's play with that. One is that several of these carvings are not displaying people who appear in iconography anywhere else, like the Gaini Cupollati. Francis does flag this up a little bit, quite like the Godlings.
Yeah. With the three fates.
Yes. And there's also an unusual tendency, probably going on all through this period, to have nouns which are singular and plural. I mean, Puck and the Pucks is one of these. Cupid and the Cupids, Faunus and the Fauns are taken over from classical antiquity. Generally speaking, when people conceive of the supernatural, it is both quite often an exemplary figure and multiple figures, depending on whether it's coming at people as one or many. And three is settled on, as a medial break.
Right.
But then again, when you're doing the hard stuff, you look at Eva Poch's material, from the Balkans, which is much, much closer to our medieval material. And, that rings some alarms for a folklorist who's like, somebody from the Balkans may be politely protesting, we are not, your dustbin of memory, we are us. Nevertheless, I'm talking about people living close to the edge and so on. East of that line at which serfdom was, increased and not abolished, where a lot of what we think of as late medieval things didn't happen, effectively, till the Russian Revolution was exported. You are going to be able to talk about folk material where the same social circumstances may have persisted, and therefore the same supernatural may have persisted. Certainly her risks from falling asleep at noon, the risk of being attacked by the otherworld is much more familiar than in the stuff we've got here. And the bit that frightens me as a researcher, I'm anticipating, not the reviews today, but the reviews later, why did we not go out and do more work on jinn? Because everybody I speak to who is coming from the Islamic world and goes, well, yeah, we've heard all of that. Bloke told me only the other day it happened to his cousin.
Right.
Embarrassingly, even while we're attempting to have a quiet dinner, I think we were having the Folklore Society annual get-together.
Oh, yeah.
Worcester. And we all went out for a curry, and it's the bits where you explain to people, a bunch of friends who get together and talk about stories. And he sort of leans on the table and goes, you don't want to talk about a load of stories. You need to talk to my mother. She knows everything about jinns. Like, okay.
Brilliant.
Well, scrape the populums and go and do some oral history.
Exactly. Well, I mean, do you think you will be writing more books like this, but in, looking kind of further afield? Do you think, have you got some plans?
I think I would love to work with more people, and this is why Simon's book on social fairies is actually good, being European-wide.
Yeah, that's great.
I think you have to start from where you are. Probably in one sense, almost anything is worth it to open up the field. But the other is you have to know your ground.
That takes years.
Yes, it does. And again, to work with a history of the medieval. I have no doubt that if we were to actually mine down into the Scandinavian material, the two books that are needed are an accessible volume which actually works on the relationship between the Scandinavian collectania, which are all accessible, and the earlier material. One of the differences is that we have lots of saints, surprisingly large number of native English saints. Of course, the more native they were, the more they started to look like fairies from the point of view of the indignant reformers. Even in the Middle Ages, you've got a lot of people kind of going, yep, okay, she's a wonderful lady and she has helped you out. Have you got any textual reference to this so-called saint of yours, which takes you back to your wells and trees and lighting candles in lonely places? Because, of course, half the time it looks pagan and the other half of the time it's happening. You've got the Lawrence of Oxford, where the bishop essentially goes down on what, to all intents and purposes, looks, like a new saint cult, finds out that he was a hanged man. Clearly his relatives thought that he ought not to have been hanged, which made him into a martyr. The court, however, took a different view on the matter. And of course, the bishop's version is he's not a saint, he's a very naughty boy.
Yeah.
Will you stop venerating him? Put those candles out.
That's classic example in that case then. But it is frustrating to see that kind of happening century after century. It sort of gets my goat. Well, people being told how to worship.
I mean, the paradox here is that one of our best stories, the faun and the girl. I love the way the faun appears in her bedroom. She asserts her virginity quite strongly, pointing out that and he offers her jeweled bangles, bracelets, earrings, golden trinkets, and other things that girls like. I was thinking, oh, happy days.
Spooky.
Well, before they invented chocolates and flowers.
That's the other thing.
That's in the Miracles of St. William of Norwich. And William of Norwich, who of course is a saint created basically for anti-Semitic purposes, only makes his way into a miracle collection because the initial view of the bishop, which was basically, we're sorry about him, he's a dead lad, we don't know who killed him, really stop making such a fuss about him, it's actually upsetting my relationship with the Jewish community of Norwich. Ultimately the tussle goes the other way. So you've got a cult there that becomes a fiction and has its own little miracle book, which of course is commissioned from everybody that Thomas knows. Unfortunately, Scandinavia has got there are very few saints. One of the interesting things is by the time the conversion of Scandinavia happened, there was a much stronger control over the generation of local saints. So whereas the position in Anglo-Saxon England was close to Wales and Cornwall, almost everybody, potentially the founder of the church received, honours at a very local level. You might suddenly make it big if somebody believed in them. You've only got 2 or 3 making the grade in Scandinavia, and therefore what you haven't got is you haven't got big miracle shrines. And also, it's at the end rather than the beginning of a journey. Whereas if we were looking at the major cult centres and also the later Marian cult centres in France, which are on the pilgrimage routes, all of which are competing with each other because they actually have to be able to work more miracles than the shrine down the road.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the point at which we would have big collections, which in many cases have not been published yet. It is a case of combing through it.
Yeah,
you have to read hundreds of these things. You
end
up like somebody in A&E. It's like, okay, right, sorry, another blind man miraculously cured. Get out of my way. Keep a natural story, please.
I just think that would be the most wonderful thing to do, and I'm thinking it now, but it's always been a dream of mine just to be able to sit there and go through all of this material, where a lot of it was in Latin. How did you cope with all of that then? So you were fairly kind of...
yes, and a lot of it is, it's like talking to people in third language in a pub. The 2 of you are using fairly simple style so you can understand what each other is saying.
Piece by piece,
One or 2 people. I take my hat off to Reginald the Durham, who really is quite a stylist. It's lovely because the editor in about 1810 obviously wants to be rude about him because he's in 1810 and he's writing about a monk, but he has to say, we believed a lot of weird stuff, but by God, he could describe a storm well.
Well, this is it. And I think that the whole of the book is filled with this kind of wit and this way that you're able to, to look at these stories and to look at the people that were writing them too. It's, as I say, a very entertaining and informative book, one which I'm very glad has been written. And so thank you for, all the work you're continuing to do in this area. And I look forward to more. Are you going to be taking this out on the road and talking at any kind of upcoming events?
I will be talking online for the Folklore Society, 8th of October.
Wonderful.
After that, I am my own agent.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I will definitely be tuning in for that. Those seminars are always brilliant anyway, the Folklore Society one. So I'll flag up the link there so people can join. And where can they get hold of your book?
University of Exeter Press have got their own website.
It's the best place to get it.
It is an academic book, but chunks of it are going to become available, which I think is also the opportunity people need.
Yeah, and I think if it is a pretty hefty, it's a pretty hefty price as well, which is really hard for people.
Right way of saying that, yes. I think that bits of it are probably going to become available because that's the ordinary routine now, so you can get a sense of what it's about.
Yeah, no, that's great. And if people come to hear you speak or tune in to the Folklore Society, then they'll be able to hear you there too. But yeah, thanks so much, Jeremy, for coming and chatting with me, and I hope to speak to you again sometime. And all the best with the this newly released book, and I look forward to other people being able to get their hands on it too.